ask you some questions, hear your perspective on it. Um, and then also, if just so you know, I am gonna record it so that way, just for like accuracy purposes, so I got all the information right.
Sure.
And it shouldn't take too long. I have about 11, 12 questions, so it shouldn't be too long, but it would be
I'm
cool.
in no hurry. I'm spending good time with you.
Perfect.
So do you want me to give you a quick little summary at first before you do the questions, or just do the questions? Because there is just so much to tell you.
And that's
I got a feeling maybe some of your questions may not
get to all of it.
May not get certain pieces, but
yeah.
You go first. You do the questions.
Okay, and then if at the end there's anything else that you want to add to it, that would be great.
Okay.
So first question, how old were you when the 9/11 attacks took place?
I'm sorry. Oh, how old was I when the event happened? So that happened in 11, right? What year did that happen?
2001.
Oh, it was 2001?
Yeah, because it'll be
we're 21 now. I would have had to have been, if I'm 64 now, that would be 44. I was probably like around 42.
42.
No, not 42. 42? Yeah, 42.
42.
That's right. Yeah. Whatever number you want to take. Your math is better than mine.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy too because it'll be the 20th anniversary this September. Yeah. And then second question, why were you in the city that day? Like, what had you in New York City?
Yeah. So, being in IT and computers, you always take refresher classes for program languages. So, since I worked in the so-called tri-state area, which is New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, they call that the tri-state, although I lived in Pennsylvania, you would go for like a class on a language like Visual Basic or C++ or COBOL, and your employer, corporate America, normally sent you for a week's training on something.
Okay.
So it was not uncommon for me to go into New York City for a week for a training class. And what's interesting is a good portion of the time, and my kids knew this when I would go in, a lot of times it would be down at the hotel, I think it was the Hyatt, at the World Trade Center. So there were a lot of training facilities throughout the city, but quite a few of them were at the towers.
Wow, yeah.
And on this day was the first, I think it was a Monday. You can check. But I remember it was just the beginning of the training class. However, my family didn't know that I was actually uptown on 6th Avenue and 52nd Street near the ABC CBS towers.
Okay.
So I went in for a training class. Now, that answers your question, but there's a little more background to that if you want to hear it.
Yeah, I would love to.
So when the attacks happened, we just started our class. And granted, now, remember, we're uptown. We're, 60, 70, 80 streets uptown. And on the same side of the Manhattan, we were on the west side. World Trade's on the west side. And right at the beginning of the training class, just only minutes into it, some girl gets her cell phone goes off. Now, cell phone service was interrupted that day because the main towers were on top of the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
So the first tower it hit started to interfere with cell phone service. So the girl gets a cell phone now. Of course, the instructor's like, come on. I told you to silence your phone. One of these.
Yeah.
And she begins to scream. So we're like, oh, she got bad news.
Yeah.
And then someone else's phone went off. And then someone else's phone went off. And all of a sudden, my phone went off, but I couldn't I couldn't get, it was one of my daughters calling, because I couldn't get good service because you're in the middle of the building. You had to go to like a window.
Yeah.
Like, so I was up on the 30-something floor of this tower. I didn't know what was happening yet. And my daughter's yelling, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" They thought I was downtown.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you talking about, you know? And they said the plane hit the tower. That was the first plane. So right then, at that point, when it was not, the second plane didn't hit yet, but they set off the fire alarms and they began to evacuate all of the skyscrapers in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
So they literally, it was weird. They literally closed down Manhattan to traffic. Traffic had to pull over.
Yeah.
They closed the tunnels. All you heard was sirens, and you saw every piece of police and fire and everything flying downtown. It was amazing. So that's when the first part of the attack happened. So that's how we knew.
Yeah, and that actually answers my my third question, so that's helpful. But then also, what was your like immediate reaction when you found out? Like, how did you feel?
My immediate action was trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
A. B, getting down onto the streets and realize something big is happening because the city, within minutes, was paralyzed.
Yeah.
Right? And the real driver was, how do I get home?
Yeah.
How do I get out of the city? Don't know what's going on. How do I get home? And only to find out as I started walking towards Times Square area where the Port Authority, where the buses are and everything. As I'm heading down, finding out from newscasts and people yelling that they closed the city, and the only way out of New York City at that time was you had to take one of the ferry boats over the Hudson, or walk over the bridges, or to the Brooklyn side.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what your next question is, but there's a really interesting part in that. So I'll just tell you. My initial response was, how do I get out of the city and get home safely?
Yeah. And I feel like this kind of might take you into it. Just take me through your actions, your perspectives, what's your experience following like that first moment? Like, what did you end up doing after that?
Yeah, so that's a good leeway into the next thing. So I started walking downtown, down the avenue, 6th Avenue.
Okay.
I get to the Times Square, and this is pretty famous. This is where the ball drops and all the big screen TVs, and everything. And all of the big screen TVs were all on the news stations. Wow, so they were broadcasting. Now, there's no traffic. No one's moving. The streets are crowded with people because they emptied a lot of the buildings.
Yeah.
People are screaming and crying because you see the first tower, and you're starting to realize, something might be happening here, other than it just being a horrendous plane crash. And all of a sudden, the second plane hits.
Yeah.
Now, that's being broadcast over the big screen TVs in Times Square. People started blacking out in the street.
Wow. Yeah.
People started fainting. And now, they were saying how the bridges are closed, the tunnels are closed, get to the waterways. I knew, because I used to take the ferry from New Jersey, I had to get to the Hudson River to try to get on a boat to at least get into New Jersey so I could make my way to the New Jersey trains and try to head home.
Yeah.
So I walked towards the Hudson River. Now, I don't know if you know, of course, there are these things called the New York Ferry Line, Waterway, I think it's called, and there's shuttle ferries that go back and forth. You park in New Jersey, you take this ferry, but they also have the famous Circle Line. Those are the big tour boats that go up and down the Hudson. They commandeered every boat that they could, the government, and were loading people like cattle through a funnel onto these boats, took you across the Hudson, and as you're going across the Hudson, the World Trade Center was almost on the water. So the smoke.
Yeah.
And like I was talking to my wife on the phone at the time, I go, you got to see this. She goes, no, I see it. It's on TV. No, you got to see this. I mean, TV's one thing, but when you're seeing it.
Yeah.
So we got over into Jersey, and they couldn't dock the big boats because Jersey that area wasn't made for these big Circle Line boats.
Yeah.
So they docked us next to somebody's yacht, and we walked off a gangplank one at a time onto the yacht, and then into New Jersey.
Wow. Wow.
And this is with people screaming and crying and.
Yeah.
So what happened was once I got to Jersey, you had to make your way down a couple miles to the Hoboken train station, and there were actually, it's sort of funny, there were yuppies. Yuppies are the young couples that drive around in Mercedes and Porsches and everything, make good money. They were picking up people and driving them to the train station.
Wow.
There were that many people. And then when we got to the train station, the trains weren't moving. They weren't allowing the trains to leave. And there were people coming across the ferry at the train station that had the asbestos, and they came from the towers. After they out, that's what it was. The second plane did hit. Okay, I'm sorry, my timing was off for the down in Times Square. It was when the first tower fell. That's when everybody started screaming.
Oh yeah.
So when the people were coming over into Jersey to get on the train, they were loaded. They looked like snowmen.
Yeah.
So I'll let you continue before we get into any other further thoughts. Your next question.
Honestly, you can keep going with that. I would love to hear more about like what else you experienced after that.
So we waited. They eventually started up the trains. And of course, no one was charged anything. It was mass exodus.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting on the train to the one that would take me closest to where Lee would meet me with the kids.
Okay.
And there was a young man sitting next to me, loaded. He looked like a goat. He was loaded with asbestos.
Wow.
And saying how he was in the second tower, how the bosses wouldn't let anybody leave because, that was just an accident in the first tower. Don't worry about it. So they actually, companies wouldn't let employees leave. And he said, screw it, and left. And the minute he got down, that's when the second plane hit.
Wow.
So now this is the interesting part. The train is now coming through New Jersey, stopping at the little train station. People getting off, with the cancer-causing asbestos all over them, trying to get into cars. We get to one of the main train hubs, and the train stops. Well, it makes sense. You're going to transfer, right? All of a sudden, they wouldn't let us out of the train. All of a sudden, there were cops at each of the train doors, and all of a sudden on the speaker, they go, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the railroad. This is not the local police department. This is the U.S. government. We are confiscating the train. Everybody on the train has to get off and get hazmated. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but the fire department set up these multiple layers of showers that you have to walk through in your clothes, with your suitcase, with your briefcases.
Wow.
And when you get through each shower, at the end, there were rabbis, there were priests, there were every religion you could think of had someone there because it was pretty traumatic. Then they put a blanket on you to try to warm up. They confiscated the train because now it's infected with asbestos, and they brought in another train. While I get on it, I finally make it to my train station. It took a normal hour and a half to 2 hour commute to and from Manhattan from where I live. Took me 9 hours to get home.
Wow.
When I finally got off the train to meet my wife and kids, there were news stations there, and guess what the government wanted to do?
What?
They wanted to hazmat you again.
No.
Because nobody knew what the other person was doing. They just knew that there were sick people, or what's the word I'm looking for? People that are have chemicals on them. What's that? Not infected. You know, there were people that just had the asbestos all over them.
Yeah,
They were trying to, yeah. So.
Wow.
Oh, so the funny part is I finally get in the car, and Lee and the kids met me. They were crying. They were hugging me. The news reporters were trying to interview people like, me, because we were soaking wet with blank towels on us and blankets on us and everything. Mm-hmm. We get in the car. We head to Pennsylvania. They closed the bridges to Pennsylvania. So we had to go across a local bridge that we knew that they didn't close. And then when I finally got home, at the time, my youngest son, Evan, and I were firemen in Pennsylvania, volunteers. Mm-hmm. I was home 5 minutes, and they called us out to go on standby for the New York Fire Department.
Wow.
So we just get back from the city, and now we go to standby in case they need it,
Yeah.
So that was that day.
Wow. And then I know you had said that you had a friend, Raymond, who passed in one of the towers.
Ray Meisenheimer. So this is the second part of the story. Mm-hmm. A lot of firemen and first responders and police died and people died or whatever. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know anybody. I knew a fireman because when I was younger, before I got married, I was a volunteer fireman on Long Island. Mm-hmm. From the age of 14 to the age of 22 before I stopped. And that's when I got married, so that's why I stopped being a fireman. And I found out that one of the firemen now, in New York City, there's special units. There are engine companies and there are ladder companies, and they call them the rescue companies. And the most famous is what's called Rescue 1. Okay. You can Google that. It's like a giant toolbox on wheels. They are the elite of the elite in the fire company. So there are, I think, 6 rescue units. Rescue 1 was Midtown Manhattan. Rescue 2, I think, was Uptown Manhattan. Rescue 3, I think, was Rescue 3, which is where my friend is in the Bronx, which is Upper Manhattan. And then there's 4, 5, and 6 that are around the boroughs. Okay. Now these are the elite of the elite. And now my friend Raymond, who I grew up with as a fireman, as teenagers, and we did training together. We were one of the first couple of EMTs on Long Island when EMTs were big, just starting out. Yeah. We were on the racing team together doing tournaments. We were both ladder climbers, and we were both nozzle men. We used to have competitions with each other because if one couldn't do it, the other one had to. Mm-hmm. So we sort of, teenagers, we sort of pushed around each other so you got hurt so that you could do the thing and not the other guy. Yeah. But, so Raymond was my age, and he was on Rescue 3, and by the time they got down from the Bronx, they were in the second tower, which fell. They never found Raymond. Wow. And everybody, and a lot of other units too, but everybody in Rescue 3 was never found. And if you look at some of the pictures of these fire trucks and rescue trucks at the foot of the World Trade, they're just disintegrated. They're disintegrated. Yeah. So when I found that out, I went to 1 or 2 of the services later on, met some old fireman friends, and I sort of dedicated the registration of my car to him. I got a customized license plate that reads FDNY space R3 to memory of Raymond. So more questions?
Yes. So then, looking back on that day and like even the days that followed, do you remember any specific acts of unity that you saw?
Actions of unity?
Yeah.
So when we were, a couple of things, of course, I remember seeing what had to have been Secret Service men stopping police cars in full flight, flying down the avenues, and literally hopping through the windows to get into the cars to go downtown.
Wow.
So every possible first responder police unit were kind of helping the others, but trying to get downtown at the same time.
Yeah.
That was one. The other one was when we got to the ferries, you can understand everybody crushing everybody to get on.
Yeah.
It was actually a little old lady with a walking stick in front of me, and she was getting crushed. So I grabbed her and did a bear hug and sort of carried her. Made me look like the hero, but actually it got me on the boat quicker. But people were helping people. And in Jersey, where people were just driving up and down between Hoboken, New Jersey, and Weehawken, New Jersey. That's where the boats landed. Literally picking people up and driving them to the train stations because I don't know, you could have left your wallet in the city, you could have left your laptop bag in the city,
yeah.
You know. You were pretty much in a coma state, walking like the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
It was just horrendous, and people were helping people, trying their best to help them get to, away from the city.
Yeah.
Next question.
Yes. And then looking back as well, how do you feel that 9/11 impacted you? You know, what do you learn? How do you feel looking back on it?
I can't. I've been a fireman both in New York and in Pennsylvania. Volunteer. You have to be a certain person to want to do it.
Yeah.
My youngest son Evan joined with me in Pennsylvania. He is now a paramedic in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, since we live right in the border, all of them. He actually saves lives every day.
Yeah.
Every day. We also lose lives every day. So how it impacted me was that there's a big difference between a volunteer, or they call them volleys, and a paid fireman, just by requirements. However, action-wise, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
You're risking your life. You're trained. You got equipment. Your gear, your Scott packs, everything weighs about 80-something pounds. You're walking into the flames.
Yeah.
You're taking so when it comes time for the actions, there is no difference between a paid and a volunteer. So it gave me a higher respect. It unified the so-called brotherhood of firemen.
Yeah.
And, and although it was a tough time for America always shines. It reminds people of life. So there were, of course, American flags everywhere. People patting Now they talk about the heroes of the covert, the people who do grocery stores. Okay, I understand, but you know what? They're not running into a flaming building,
no.
So there's a fine line there. But it did unite a lot of people, and that's one of the good things.
Yeah. And then anything else to add? Anything else that you really want to point out before we finish the interview?
So let's see. I told you why I was in the city. I told you how we sort of found out about it. People evacuating. The kid who sat next to me on the train was calling her and his mom, who didn't know this was happening.
Wow.
Because if you weren't listening to the TV, you didn't know, and trying to tell her, hey, the building exploded. He's sitting there looking like a white ghost with his powder on him, and just the whole government hazmatting thing and the cameras at every news station, at every train stop. It the first year anniversary. I mean, if you went back into the city afterwards, just all of the pictures that they put, they couldn't find people. They actually put pictures of people. There's a little old church next to the World Trade Center that had this big wrought iron fence all around it, and people were posting pictures of loved ones, or co-workers, firemen, policemen that they couldn't find, and hoping that someone would find somebody. Just that whole thing. It just, if you were there, you're kind of united with the people that were there.
Yeah.
If you weren't there and you talk to people about it, some people were sensitive about it. Some people like, so what? That's sort of, you want to sort of crack them on the skull or something.
Yeah.
And then nothing, and people forget. I mean, in my IT world, I mentored a lot of young people to teach them how to do programming and stuff. And before I retired, there were people who had no idea what 9/11 was.
Wow.
Because it was so long ago. So it's you get multiple feelings about it.
Yeah.
But you do sort of grow numb to it as time goes on. There's nothing you can do about it. You just remember, you train better, you know better. And then a lot of prejudice. A lot of prejudice. There were policemen and firemen, great people that I knew were totally prejudiced against Muslims.
Wow, yeah.
You'd be standing in a store, in the middle of a grocery store, and a fight would break out. And it has nothing to do with anything. So there was a lot of prejudice and anger going on around that time.
Which is so sad to hear, too.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it hurts. Look at today with this so-called shooting down in Georgia, and this person who killed all those people in the 3 different spots, and they're blaming it on China, and it's like, well, sin is sin, evil is evil. Call it what you want. It's still God's eyes. It's still sin.
Yeah.
And there are some pretty sad, confused people out there. And there are some really nice, loving people who just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are still heroes, and I'm not talking paid professional heroes. There are people that step up all the time.
Yeah.
Even as simple as standing in a grocery line and seeing someone being harassed and stepping up and saying something.
Yeah.
That's as much of a hero as someone that goes running in to fight prejudice and things like that is a constant battle in life. It goes all the way back to Cain and Abel. So been around a while.
Yeah.
What else?
That's all I have.
It's a lot, ain't it?
Yeah, honestly, like I've so many good notes right now, and it's honestly cool to hear too, because like you said, like I was, one when 9/11 actually happened, so I don't have any memory of it, but still being able to.
You had to have been like what, around 4 or 5 or.
No, I was actually only 1, because I was.
Oh, you were 1.
Yeah,
okay.
I was born in 2000, and so I would have been almost 2. Which is crazy because, I don't remember it, but I know that it's impacted so many people. So getting to learn about it and, learn about the true heroes of, that just tragedy, and getting to hear their stories and what truly happened is really cool.
Well, the other thing that's really tragic about it is all the rescue workers, firemen, policemen, and just volunteers who worked down in ground zero for the longest time digging bodies out.
Yeah.
Now these people are dying of cancer.
Mhm.
You know, and you can go a whole new series on how people fought the government to try to get money for these people. I have a friend, a good friend of mine, who's an officer of a search and rescue team that Evan and I ran with in Pennsylvania for a long time.
Mhm.
He just happened to be down at the World Trade Center when it happened, and there's a picture of him carrying a fireman out, and they're both totally loaded in this asbestos. And it was in one of the papers, and he has cancer right now.
Wow, yeah.
You know, and it's all from that.
So sad. So,
yeah. It is. But life goes on, sweetie.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with me. It's been really cool.
And if you think of something, or if you have a question of something, you can text me or call me.
Yeah, absolutely.